Hey guys. Okay, so last week we kicked off part 1 of what will most likely end up being a 5-part video series that looks at how to work out whether a house is pre-1911 construction. Now, if you haven't seen that video yet, I'd strongly recommend that you go back and check that video out first, because it sets the scene for what we're going to talk about today and in the future videos. More specifically, what it did is basically looked at first and foremost why you should care about whether your house or a house is pre-1911 construction. Spoiler alert, it can have a massive, and I mean massive impact on your renovation and extension plans, on the design intent or the design pathway that you go down, I should say. Then we actually looked at, okay, how do you actually approach this whole house dating process? Today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the sewerage-related resources. More specifically, we're going to look at 3 resources. We're going to start with the contour survey, then we're going to go the surveyor's field books, and then we're going to finish with the detail plans. Now, what I want to do is give you guys a bit of a high-level overview, let's just say, as to what these resources are, why they were created. Then we're going to look at how you actually access these resources. So basically, which direction do you run to obtain these resources? And then last but not least, I want to give you 3 tips on how to use each one of these resources to help speed up the process for you. Now, when I pulled up before, I grabbed out my trusty little notepad and scribbled down 3 points for each one, because I can talk on this stuff. Like, I had a Port Town planning colleague call me yesterday and she's like, oh, I've got a couple of questions about house dating stuff. Half an hour later, we were deep in detailed plans and I was still chewing off her ear. So yeah, I thought, okay, I'll write down my 3 points for each one, and that way I can stay on track, short, sharp, somewhat short, sharp video. My video's never short and sharp, let's be real. But yeah, somewhat short and sharp video based on my standards, so that I don't sit here for half an hour chewing off your ears. So where do we start? Well, let's go way back to 1910, the Water Board, and they do have a more longer technical name. I think they're called the Metropolitan Water and Sewerage Supply Board. I just call them the Water Board for short. So the Water Board decided that they wanted to sewer Brisbane. Now, when I first heard this, I was like, mind blown. I thought Clem Jones was the father of sewerage in Brisbane, and that didn't happen until like the 60s or something like that. No, it turns out we as a city were actually talking about sewering our city way back in 1910. Well, no, it's probably even prior to 1910, because the work started in 1910. So yeah, back in 1910, what they did is they sent a heap of surveyors out across the city, and they created what I commonly refer to as a really crude map. Now, technically speaking, it's not a crude map. Like, they put a bucket load of effort into creating the contours for this map, and like, I read some of the surveyor's notes and I'm like, man, there is a lot of work that went into this. But it was really crude compared to the future revisions and additions, so the surveyor's field books and the detail plans and all of that sort of stuff. So in simple terms, what they did is they basically went around the city, they plotted out where all the roads were, and everywhere where they saw an isolated individual house, they put a little square on the map. Everywhere where they saw clusters of houses, they put hatches across the map. So you can actually open up this map, find your property, and if you look at it and you see a little square approximately where your property is, and I do stress approximately because I've seen so many situations where they've been slightly out, but if you see your house in the approximate location of a square, okay, more than likely, like I'm talking 99% likely, it's a pre-1911 house. If you look at that map and you see hatching across the property, then you go, okay, odds are that this is a pre-1911 house because the area was developed at that point in time. However, if you look at the block and you can't see any squares and you can't see any hatching, then the chances, or the scales, let's just say, are tipping in your favour for it being post-1911. Now, I know you guys are probably sitting there going, hold on a sec, if there's nothing there, doesn't that just mean clear as day? It's not pre-1911. I'm going to stuff this up many times in this video, pre and post. I'll get to that when I talk about my tips, but just trust me when I sit there and say that you can't rely on nothing on the map equaling post-1911. Okay, so they went around the city, they crudely worked out where everything was, and the purpose of that whole survey was to work out, should we actually undertake this task? Like, how big is this task? How are we actually going to lay the sewer lines across the city? How are we going to make this work type thing? So yeah, it was a high-level map, again, in context of the future maps, high-level map to try and work out, is this project viable? Then what happened? So that took them roughly 11 months, I think it was, I think they started in like April 1910 and finished in like March 1911. Don't quote me on it, but those are the rough dates. So yeah, they got back, they looked at these maps, and they basically, and I'm using a bit of creative license here in my descriptions, don't hold me to technical stuff here, but basically they looked at these maps and they went, yeah, okay, we can do this. We can make this happen. Let's sewer this city. So what they then did is sent the surveyors around to to fill out the surveyors' field books. So they literally went house to house to house, mapping out each individual house. And it wasn't a case of, okay, there's a square, there's a square. It was like literally outlining verandas, outlining stairs, outlining water tanks, chicken coops, all of that stuff. The thunder boxes in the backyard. Like, I love looking at these detailed plans, or the field surveyors books, and then subsequently the detailed plans, and seeing the little toilets outlined at the back of these blocks. Like, you can imagine the dunny man running across the back. So yeah, basically they sent everyone around the whole city. So this process started in 1912, I think it was. Yeah, pretty sure it was 1912, and went all the way through to the 1970s. I think it was like 1972 or 73, something like that. It took a very, very long time. Now, unfortunately, we had 2 wars during that period, so they had to stop because funding had to be redirected, because obviously in terms of priorities, fighting a war is a higher priority than sewering a city. So the funding got redirected from these projects to wartime efforts, which meant the projects were paused at multiple times. And then because of those long pauses, they basically had to go back and resurvey the areas. So, no, I'll hold what I was just about to say until I get to my tips. So, just try and keep everything on track here in today's video. So yeah, we've gone through, we've created these surveyors field books. Then what they did is they collated all of the hand-drawn images for all of the houses into these detailed plans. So the detailed plans are black and white images which show collations of houses in a locality. So it might be 2 streets, it might be 5 streets, however many they can fit onto the image. So you see the roads and you see the black outline of all the houses once they've collated the information from the field surveyors books. So yeah, they're the 3 resources, and they're sewerage-related resources. We start with the contour map, which shows the contours and the rough outlines where houses are, where clusters of houses are. We then have the field surveyors books, which are a collection of hand-drawn sketches from the surveyors as they went around mapping out everything in the city to work out exactly where these lines are going to go. And then we have the detail plans, which are a collation of the field surveyors' hand drawings for each locality or each block, let's just say. So where do you find these resources? Well, thankfully, most of these ones are readily available through Brisbane City Council's website. So I actually have these resources bookmarked on my computer, and I've had them bookmarked on my computer for years and years and years. So yesterday, I think it was, when I sat down and went, I need to work out what I'm going to talk about in this week's video. I went, I probably should work out how you actually access these pages, because I haven't done it in years. Turns out it's harder than I thought. So basically the page you go to is called Brisbane Images, but obviously if you go to Google and put in Brisbane Images, you're going to get photos of the Story Bridge, the Brisbane River, all of that sort of stuff. So it doesn't work that way. So what I did was I typed in BCC Archives into Google, and then I clicked on the first link, and then I scrolled all the way down the bottom, and you'll see a link or a hyperlink to Brisbane Images. Go there. Once you're on that page, you'll have access to the contour maps. Now, it's not 100% straightforward. You basically got to find your context map, and then, or I think there's actually a catalogue of the different suburbs, and they tell you which map to go to. You need to then go to that map, look at it, play. I always open up like a Google map or something like that, and it's like, okay, there's a landmark, okay, narrow it down, work down through that. So that's the contours, and then I'm going to jump now to the detail plans, because they are also available through that Brisbane Images website. So you go there. Likewise, it's not exactly the most straightforward process. You've got to find the overall map, find the number on the overall map, then find the detailed plan with that number, etc., etc. Now, one of the future videos I'm thinking of recording is one that talks about how to work out whether components of the house are post-1946 additions. So my intention is to talk about the detailed plans and how to access them and interpret them and all of that sort of stuff in a lot more detail. Detail plans, detail, pun not intended. Anyway, talk about it in a lot more detail in a future video, because I use those every single day. Like, I live and breathe those detailed plans. So yeah, keep an eye out for that video if you want a bit more information. But long story short, go to the Brisbane Archives site, and then go to the Brisbane Images page, and then you'll find the detailed plans there. The field surveyors books, unfortunately, you do need to go to Brisbane City Council's archives of Maruka to access those. So they're not available in digitised form. You need to actually go in there and physically view the images. So go to the Brisbane Archives page, check out their opening hours and all that sort of stuff. You can't just rock up most days. So you make sure you check that information out before you turn up. Okay, so now you know what they are, where to go to find them. Let's talk about my 3 tips. First and foremost, when it comes to the contour map, what you need to understand is that it does not account for relocators. So it does not account for houses that were built elsewhere in the city, picked up, moved and plonked onto the property after 1911. Now, relocators have the exact same level of protection as a house that was built on the block back prior to 1911. And it was surprisingly common to pick these houses up and move them around back in the day. Like, my mind is always blown every time I see a situation like this. I'm like, just how do you pick up a house and move it around? Anyway, long story short, it was very common back then, and this map will obviously not, the contour map will not show the relocators because it didn't exist on that property at that point in time. Next, there is an 8-month gap. So like I suggested, the contour mapping process started in, what did I say, April 1910 and didn't finish until 11 months later, or roughly whatever it was. So let's say, for example, 2/3, I'm estimating, pulling a number out of the back of my mind here, but let's say 2/3 of the city was mapped out prior to the end of 1910. So if your house was built that year, specifically, or more importantly in the second half of that year, it would not, and it was in that first 2/3 of the city that was mapped, or surveyed I should say, then it would not be shown on this map. And then last but not least, we need to account for human error, or to put it more politely, purpose, map purpose. So again, reading the surveyor's notes from these processes, it is very clear that the focus was on mapping the contours, trying to work out the lay of the land, which direction, because obviously poop does not go uphill. Groundbreaking, I know. But yeah, trying to work out, okay, how are they going to direct these lines so that everything flows in the right direction? So yeah, the primary focus was on the contour side of things. It was less so on the dwelling side of things. And that's reflected in the fact that they just used that hatching for the clusters of houses. So as a result, I've seen so many situations where the house was definitely a pre-1911 house. It was originally built on that block and it is not shown in any individual outlines or hatching on the contour map. So yeah, take it with a degree of caution, let's just say. It's one puzzle piece in this whole game. It's not to be relied on as a single source of truth. Now, let's jump next to the detailed plans, because like I suggested before, you can access both the contour map and the detailed plans through Brisbane City Council's website. And so that's naturally the process you're going to follow. You're going to go to the freely, readily available resources before you go the effort of actually trampsing all the way to the archives to be able to view this stuff. So first thing, again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record saying this all the time with all of these resources, does not account for the relocators. So you need to keep that in mind. Next, beware of number changes. I had a job the other day at Paddington. Oh my God, I spent so much time, more time than I ever want to admit to myself, trying to work out why my damn house, which I knew was going to be pre-1911, was not lining up with the floor plan of this house on the detailed plan. I was like, I know this thing is pre-1911. I know it's not a relocator. Why is the house not matching up? Because they changed the house numbers in the street and I was looking at the neighbour's property. So yeah, be warned about that one. And then the final thing is the delay on the collation. So the detailed plans were collated after all of the mapping was done, and there could sometimes, or more often than not, be a delay between that individual surveying done, or the field surveyor's book being created, and the detailed plan being created. So basically I just need to check the time. 13 minutes, I got to round this up. I'm determined to stay on Instagram's 15-minute limit and not split this video. So, you need to understand there's a delay. Usually it's only a delay of a few years, but I was talking to Marianne, the house detective, the other day, and she said she'd seen a situation where there was a 40-year delay. So you need to understand that if you're looking at the detailed plan and you're seeing something on that detailed plan, it may not necessarily be there at that point in time. It may have been removed by then. Okay, then we jump back to the field surveyor's books. First thing you need to note is the proportions are not accurate. So they were just hand drawn out on site and they went, yeah, okay, there's a line there. Yeah, it comes across there, but they accurately dimensioned it. So when you look at the field surveyor's book, again, I remember one job I looked at it and I was trying to prove the rear addition was not part of the original house. And I looked at the detailed plan, which was, let's say, 1927, and I saw it was there. And then I looked at the, let's say, 1912 hand sketch from the field surveyor's book, and I'm really trying to speed this up. And I was like, it's a squished house there. Great, the addition wasn't there. And long story short, Heritage Architect actually pointed out to me that the proportion, everything was drawn in the field surveyor's book, not to proportion. So watch out for that one. You need to rely on the numbers, not the dimension, not the actual visual proportions. Next, like I suggested before, they had to go back multiple times and do surveys in certain areas. They used a different colour every time they did a new survey through the area. So sometimes you can go back and actually look at them and see the different colours and see how the houses have evolved during those periods. And then the final thing is you need to understand that, or not understand, you need to be aware that if you look at the field surveyor's book, sometimes they have a lot of additional information in terms of owners' names or house names and things that didn't necessarily make it through to the detailed plans. Okay, let's wrap this up really quickly. I'm so close to my limit.